Our guest today is a gentleman named Art Vuolo, who has had quite the multifaceted career in radio and video.
Yeah.
And if I may borrow a quote from Madeline Kahn as she was speaking to Terry Garr in Young Frankenstein, what is it that you do?
Yeah, I do the things we do well. One of the things I enjoy the most is watching people try to describe what it is that I do with ordinary words. It's very difficult. I basically have married video and radio. A very dear friend of mine by the name of Shotgun Tom Kelly, who is the evening personality on Sirius XM Radio's 60s channel, which they moved from channel 6 to 73. That made sense, didn't it? You know,
I know they changed
they put the 50s on 5, 60s on 6, 70s on 7. Made lots of sense. So let's take these two 50s and 60s channels and move them up into the 70s, where the way they told it to me is we wanted to put them in the neighborhood with the old folks music, okay? Because, see, demographically, we're old now. See? Yeah. So anyway, he, back in the mid-70s, took an 8mm color camera, film camera, not 8mm video, but 8mm film, and went into his radio station, which was known as B100. It was KFMB FM in San Diego, and it was one of the early top 40 FMs. And he basically did a station presentation showing all the different DJs, starting out with the general manager, Paul Palmer, late Paul Palmer, sadly, and Bobby Rich, who was the program director at the time, and showing all the different DJs and everything. And I went nuts when I saw it. I said, I was very familiar with air checks, which are tapes of stations so you can get an idea what a radio station sounds like. But a video air check or a filmed air check or whatever with pictures so you can see the jock on the air, you can see their body language, you can tell if they're enjoying what they're doing. You can just look behind the curtain, as they said in The Wizard of Oz.
Sure.
You know, everybody wants to see how it's done. So I said, this is cool. So I couldn't wait to get my first video camera. I started in I got my first VCR as soon as the Betamax came out.
Oh, boy.
In spring of 76. But I didn't get my first color camera until I think it was 79. That's when I started doing the video air checks and went heavily through the 80s and 90s. And now that ever since 2000, I'm still doing it, but on a much reduced schedule than I used to.
And I imagine it was a good business for DJs looking to move up.
Yeah, well, it was.
Or promotion.
Yeah, but for me, it
stations.
was more of a hobby. It certainly wasn't a business. I mean, I did sell them, but at such reasonable prices, there was no way I could keep a roof over my head with what I would get for video air checks. But it was, a lot of times, and they did help people get jobs. Because somebody can look at a video air check and see a lot about the person that they couldn't see and listen. Plus the fact that it's a little harder to, what's the word I'm looking for? You can fake a audio by just going into a production room, and it's not really
cutting and pasting.
Yeah,
right.
It's not really reflective maybe of what that person's talent really is. So in fact, that my friend Flash Phelps, also on the 60s channel, I had video of him from a little station in West by God, Virginia, Martinsburg, West Virginia. Yeah, and they always say by God between. Anyway, and they couldn't believe how wacky he was in the studio. And they were looking for a wacky 60s type DJ to put on the 60s channel. The two guys, Dave Logan and Lee Abrams, who were setting up all the channels on XM before it was XM and Sirius together, they watched my video and they turned to each other and in unison they went, "Oh my God, this is exactly what we're looking for." So it was great. He got the job immediately because of the video. So there.
Okay. Is it really work intensive to do these, or have you got it pretty much rote by now?
When you say work intensive, I mean, is it easy for me to do it?
Yeah.
A lot of times the best ones I've done were on the fly. Oh, can I get my camera? And this kind of thing. One of the ones I'm proudest of is Dan Ingram from New York, considered to be by people in the industry the greatest DJ of all time. Dan Ingram was most famous for afternoons on WABC in New York when it was the number one station in America. And
this New Yorker who grew up with him will never argue that point.
That's right. Dan Ingram, he had the most famous jingle. And then after he was done with ABC, he did resurrect on WCBS FM, which is this big oldie station in New York, but he didn't want to do a daily show. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll just do weekends. So he did a Saturday and Sunday weekend show. Well, getting into Black Rock was the nickname of the building where CBS network was in New York. Getting in there on a weekend, and it was on a Sunday afternoon, was like breaking into Fort Knox. I swear to you, it was not easy. But Joe McCoy, the program director, he set it up for me. I got in there, and you know what I have found out now that he has gone on to the big DJ in the Sky radio station? I found out from his son Chris in Fort Lauderdale that I am the only one that ever shot video of Dan Ingram.
Seriously?
On the air.
Wow.
Yeah. You can go on the internet and look up Dan Ingram and you'll see a still picture and you'll hear audio. There's gobs of audio out there. There is no video. The only video is the one that I shot in August of 1992. It's the only one in existence, honest to God.
Now, you're talking about shooting all of these people, all of these DJs on radio, kind of the observer.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me your resume in radio.
See, we should have pre-screened all these questions. Well, my resume, I started out in Indianapolis, where I was living at the time, helping a very popular radio personality who was my mentor, and his name was Jim Shelton at WIBC. This was the friendly voice of Indiana, a 50,000-watt AM station on 1070 that today is off the air. Just to show you how sad which has happened to radio. I mean, WIBC moved from 1070 to 93.1 in later years, about a dozen, maybe 15 years ago. And they turned the AM into a sports station, WFNI, The Fan. That's very creative. Yeah. And recently, the land became more valuable than the station. They had two little FM translators that had 95% of the audience, and only 5% were on that 50,000-watt signal. So he sold the land, and they dropped all 6 radio towers, and they're building houses on that property now. Yeah. Isn't that sad?
Yeah, what else?
But so that's where I started with him. Helping him, he would remote his show every night from different car dealers around downtown. This is back when car dealers were actually in downtown Indianapolis.
Yes.
And my high school was somewhat downtown, and I would go after high school and help him and hand him the records and the ETs, which stood for electrical transcriptions, which had the commercials were actually on big platters, and his show was called Platter Party. And I almost got him fired once because he let me read a commercial on the air, and management did not take friendly to that at all. But that's how I started, I only had a radio show for a short time in Ann Arbor, where I lived after we moved from Indianapolis. I was on, in fact, in 1967, I was on the night the riots broke out in Detroit. I was on the air. It was a Sunday night, and I had pre-taped the show that night and was there running the tape because I wanted it to run well. And one of the songs I had the misfortune to be playing that night was Barry McGuire.
Eve of Destruction.
And we got calls saying, why don't you play The Doors and light my fire while you're at it, And I didn't know.
That's a trial by fire, awful. Literally. Yeah.
So I did. I worked as a board op at some stations and stuff. I didn't do a lot on the air, but I've been a guest on many, many talk shows.
Sure.
So like this one.
Yes.
On WKDW, which, like I told you before, I said I heard those call letters. I thought of WKBW Buffalo, a very famous. But you know what? Those call letters are now still on Channel 7. It seems like all the heritage call letters of famous radio stations are now on TV stations.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, WXYZ in Detroit. It's on TV, KOB in Albuquerque.
Right.
Go around the country. The famous letters are on TV stations.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Now back when you were in business, actually looking to put a roof over your head, you were a researcher and publisher.
Yeah, I came up with an idea called the Radio Guide. There's TV Guide. Well, I did the Radio Guide, and it was a little pamphlet that listed all the radio stations, usually of a particular format, or all the contemporary stations, all the country stations, all the easy listening stations, whatever kind of format. And it's a little what they call a trifold, the way you would fold a letter before you put it in an envelope, that kind of a pamphlet. And we put them in fast food places like McDonald's, Burger King, what have you, or we put them in 7-Elevens, places that have many, many locations. And then we tie a radio station in, and you go pick up your handy-dandy WLS Chicago Radio Guide at McDonald's, courtesy of Just Pants. That was a place that sold Just Pants. That was my first biggie. I did 250,000 guides for WLS. And while supplies last, you didn't have to buy anything, but once you went into a McDonald's to pick it up and you smell the food, you buy something. McDonald's doesn't pay anything. They just give us the counter space. The radio station promotes it over the air, and the sponsor pays for it all. And that was a very lucrative business for 33 years. I put out over 100 million of those little radio guides, and I had a printer in Chicago that loved me. And I had run of the place like no other of their customer. I mean, I could walk in like I was the president of the company. No place was off bounds for me. It was a great relationship. But now, everything that was in that is on the internet.
Of course.
You know, the radio stations during the downturn in the economy, about in 2008 or so, they didn't want to give away free airtime, even if it was promoting themselves. So it was a combination of they didn't want to give away what they could sell. The internet was cutting into my business. Costs were going up.
Sure.
The economy was toning down. It was bad.
Now, for our listeners, I got to tell you that the day before this interview, Art kindly invited me to sit with him and
a bunch of radio geeks.
A bunch of radio geeks. But not just radio geeks, 6 other people. But, I mean, these were some of the high-powered people in the industry. There are 2 questions here. How'd you meet them all, number one? And number 2...
We just threw it together. I mean, I was coming to Venice. My brother lives in Venice.
Right.
Okay. So I was in the area. I wanted to see everybody. I didn't want to come see my brother and say, "Hi, brother. Now I'm going to go out and visit people." So I said, why don't we see if we can get everybody to get together for lunch? So I think it was Dwight Douglas that picked the place. Dwight's a very famous radio guy. And then...
Tell us about Dwight a little bit.
Well, you know, he was a programmer and a consultant and what have you, and he worked for a lot of big companies, very well known within the industry.
Yes.
And I had no idea he lived down here. And then I have another friend of mine, Ed Weigel, who sounds exactly like the late Gary Owens from Rowan and Martin's
voice. Yes.
Laughing. Yeah, perfect radio voice. And he does a lot of voice work. He lives here.
And one of the... He may be the one probably that most of our listeners would know if they're into all-star wrestling.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of wrestling, a lot of race car stuff.
For WWE.
Right, for WWE. And he was doing this all out of a studio on the south end of Sarasota. And now he does it, I think, out of a studio in his own home, like so many people. Ed Salomon, who was very famous. He ran the CMA for Longman Country Music Association. I knew him through the CRS in Nashville, which is the country radio seminar. And so Ed and I go way back. He's also married to a friend of mine's ex-wife. Katie O'Neill was her name at the time. And I know him for a while. He was at WHN in New York, a very famous country station in New York City. There were Nina Rossman, who worked for R&R, which was Radio and Records, a leading trade publication.
Yes.
She had a sheet out herself, a newsletter that was for country fans. There was a woman named Kathy who she books comedy acts and what have you. We've been talking. And when she gave me her address, I said I could walk to your house from my brother's. She was just on the other side of the Tamiami Trail.
And all these folks live down
here. Yeah,
there.
all live here. And I said, holy cow, let's all get together. That way, before getting to my brother's house, I got to see everybody I wanted to see, all in one place, all at one time. It was wonderful. We had a great time. I took a
we did have a great time.
I'm going to send that picture to the trade publications. I'll bet they'll print it.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Now, with all of the individual announcers, jocks, who you have...
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
I'm not going to say who's your favorite. I'm just going to say, who did you enjoy shooting and talking to the most?
Well, my favorite two shows are the Z Morning Zoo in New York when Scott Shannon first started Z100. I loved that show. And out of Indianapolis, where I got the radio bug bit me, which of course this is way before they were in Indianapolis, the Bob and Tom Show, which is syndicated to about 100 stations around the country, but originates in Indy. I watched that show because it's on TV now. It's on the internet. You can watch the radio show, and I think this is where a lot of shows are going. I know that when I was over on the other side of the state, I guested on the KVJ show, which is Kevin, Virginia, and Jason at WRMF in West Palm Beach, and they have like 4 cameras in the studio. Bob and Tom have 7 cameras. Free Beer and Hot Wings out of WGRD Grand Rapids, they're syndicated. They have cameras. And they have the engineer hooked it up so there's a little something on the camera that when that person is talking, that camera goes on. When they all talk at once, I have no idea what happens. But this is the way it's going. The morning radio shows are becoming TV shows. They're becoming all entertainment.
Imus is like one of the first ones to do it back on MSNBC.
You're right. And didn't Stern do it too, I think? I mean, it's funny because the question I usually get, and where I thought you were going with this is, who have you wanted to do but they wouldn't let you?
Oh.
Because there are 3.
There you go.
There are 3, and they're in East, West, and Central, okay?
And they're all living.
And they're, yes, they're all still alive, okay. And I had to think about that for a second because we are losing a lot of people. Rick Dees, never let me do him, if you'll excuse the expression, in L.A., Howard, not only he never let me do him, but he hates the fact that I have video of him from when he was in Detroit, and he got on his knees and begged into the TV camera. Channel 7 did a story on him. He says, please, give me a listen. I just bought a new car, American. Give me a shot. He was begging for listeners, and it's so beneath him now. Yeah. He hates that I have that. Yeah. And the other one was Jonathan Brandmeier in Chicago. So those are the 3 that have never let me in the studio to do video.
Okay.
They're a loss.
All right. Now your personal favorites just from listening to all the air checks through the years. I know Ingram. Who else?
Yeah. Well, God, there are any number. John Records Landecker, WLS Chicago.
Very well known.
I've known John since he was in high school. He's one of my definite favorites. I love B.J. Shea at KISW in Seattle. He's a wonderful talent. Paul Castronovo, who we just got together with him from Miami. He's on Big 105.9 in Miami. He's another one that I'm very fond of. Tom Bernard up in the Twin Cities, legend. And could not have been nicer, but it took many years to finally get in to do him. But and it's funny when I say people, I say that we need a better way of phrasing it. Did I ever do you? Did I ever shoot you? We got to think of a better way.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. All right, we have a little less than 5 minutes left. I want to get your thoughts on the industry. Well,
are you sure?
Well, hold on. I mean, you were there for the salad days of the industry, and actually I was too when I was much younger. Mm-hmm. And even though most of my career has been in television, I have had various stops at radio. When do you think it started to go, I don't want to say bad, south, but vanilla, and when did we start to lose the listenership?
I'm at the end of a 2-week tour through the state of Florida, okay? I've been dialing up some stations here and there just to hear what they sound like. And there is no, I used to say there's no shortage of carbon paper, but a lot of people don't understand the term. Let's just say it's a rubber stamp. Everything sounds the same. Do you remember when there was a show on TV called PM Magazine?
Sure.
Every major market in the country had a PM Magazine. And every male and female host looked like they were cranked out of the same Ken and Barbie. They all looked the same. They all sounded the same. And that's the way all the morning radio shows throughout the country have a boy and a girl, and all the boys sound the same, all the girls sound the same. It's just the same old thing, and it's boring as all get out. I mean, it's really hard to find entertainment on the radio. The E factor is missing, and it's a shame,
What is the future for local radio, both like us, non-commercial, nonprofit, and mom and pop stations who are commercial?
Everybody wants to work for the mom and pops now because they're tired of the BS of the big corporations. They don't want to deal with it. The iHearts, the Cumuluses, the Odysseys. There's a couple of good companies. Hubbard's a good company. Beasley's a pretty good company. They're big companies that are run almost like mom and pops. But it's just that they're tired of, are these stations being programmed for listeners or stockholders? You see, and that's the problem. Erica Farber, head of the RAB, the Radio Advertising Bureau, she interviewed me years ago for Radio and Records magazine. She said, "What's wrong with radio?" I summed it up in one sentence. Not enough radio. She said, "What's wrong with the radio business?" I said, "Too much business, not enough radio." And that's the problem. They put too much emphasis on. And the other big problem today is that we're running out of the fact that, unfortunately, we're blowing off the older listeners, trying to program to young listeners who don't listen to the radio, don't even own a radio.
Who don't listen to the radio,
who
don't have the spendable income that we have.
Exactly. Older people have more money to spend, and they're chasing all those older people off to satellite radio or something, or to public radio. A lot of people listen to public radio now. I have a friend of mine who's running the University of Michigan public station, and he says, "I so much more enjoy this than when I was working in commercial radio. So much less pressure, And he's a diehard Michigan State grad, and he's working for the University of Michigan's network. He says they may be the big blue, but they pay in big green, so he loves it."
Beautiful. All right, Art Vuolo, it has been a joy.
Pleasure.
It was a joy having lunch with you and your cronies yesterday.
It's a pleasure meeting you. And you know what's really weird? You look like you sounded. And we all in radio, it's always, you don't look like you sound.
Right.
You actually look like you sound.
Oh, thank God for that. All right. Thanks for listening, everyone, to Life Stories. I'm Jody Davis. I host Theater 97.5, old time radio at its best. Tuesdays, 5:30 p.m., Saturdays. What time are we on Saturdays? 9:02 p.m. and Sundays at 6:03 p.m. We hope you'll give a listen. Ciao for now.